Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today I have a return guest, Imran Ahmed, founder of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, to tell us about a shocking new report that your team has just dropped. So welcome, Imran.
It's so good to be with you, Nikki.
Yes, you too. Last time we talked, it was way back in January, and you exposed some horrific information about TikTok, and that report was called Deadly by Design. So can you remind us what your findings were there?
So we wanted to look at the world's fastest growing platform and one of the most important platforms for young people at TikTok. Mm-hmm. We set up accounts as 13-year-old girls in 4 different countries, the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. And then we recorded the first half hour of the For You feed. So like what the platform shows you algorithmically based on knowing that you're a 13-year-old girl. What we found was really disturbing. Within 2.6 minutes, it was giving those accounts self-harm content. Within 8 minutes, eating disorder content. Every 39 seconds on average. And Nikki, here's the real kicker, that when we renamed the accounts from a name like Susan to Susan Lose Weight, so to show that the user is potentially vulnerable, what we found was that those accounts got 12 times as much self-harm content. So the platform can recognize vulnerability. And instead of doing what you or I would do, or any of your listeners would do, if you met a child which is clearly vulnerable and has dysmorphia issues, that you would immediately try and take action to help them. The platform says, I know how to addict them. Let's give them more of that stuff. So it's so cynical, the ruthless mathematics of how that platform works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Okay. And after you dropped that report, did TikTok make any changes?
Yes, they did. They removed our ability to do that kind of research in future.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So no positive changes.
Not really, no.
Okay. Not surprising. So we're going to talk about YouTube today, and your new report is called YouTube's Anorexia algorithm. And for a little background, here in the US, 4 out of 5 kids are on YouTube starting at age 3. Pew Research says it's the most popular social media site amongst teenagers, and they're spending an average of 70 minutes a day on the platform. That is a ton of time being fed content that YouTube is deciding for them. And parents are trusting YouTube to make safe decisions for our children. And most parents don't actually use any parental controls on YouTube. So my question is, can we trust YouTube? And what did you find in this report?
TLDR, no, we can't. And let me explain why. So let's start from the beginning, which is that YouTube have always had incredibly good sounding policies on this stuff. So they claim that they remove harmful eating disorder content. Mm-hmm. They claim that they age restrict content that is even adjacent to eating disorders. Mm-hmm. They claim that they promote responsible and authoritative recommendations. And they say that they understand that weight loss content can harm teenagers. So we wanted to look at, well, okay, if you set up an account as a child, as a young girl on that platform, and you watch one video on disordered eating, so, unhealthy eating patterns, what does it recommend to you next? Because the best way of understanding these platforms is, yes, anyone can say what they want, but the truth is that only some content gets recommended. Platforms take decisions every microsecond on what to promote and what to demote. And they also have the ability to decide what to monetize, so what to place ads next to as well, because that's really how they make their money. They're advertising businesses. Right. So what we found was, in fact, that of those recommendations, 1,000 that we gathered, 7 out of 10 broke their own rules. They broke their rules by being about eating disorders. So that's 1 in 3. About a further 1 in 3 were for weight loss content. But here's what was really worrying. 1 in 20 of the recommendations to a teenage girl's account that looked at one video on disordered eating, 1 in 20 of the recommendations was for self-harm or suicide content. So the platform recognizes that this child may have body dysmorphia and mental health issues and says, I know what people like that also get addicted to, harming themselves. And I think that's what was so disturbing about it. Now, what we also then did was look at whether or not what the comments looked like there. Are kids watching this and going, no, this is fine. Look, this is really, I don't want to do this. This is bad. What we found was, in the comments section, some really disturbing stuff about how people were saying, I've been in recovery for years, but this video has made me want desperately to starve myself again. We also looked at whether or not ads were appearing on those. Would you believe that there were ads for things like HelloFresh, for Nike, for Grammarly appearing on this lethal content? And then we also then broke down the types of content that we saw. And I'm really happy to talk about that shortly as well. But that's what gave it its name, the anorexia algorithm, because there was literally stuff on there for something called the Anorexia Bootcamp. And that is as disturbing and as dangerous as it sounds, Nikki.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. Where's the disconnect? YouTube's saying they don't allow this type of content, and the technology exists to scrub and remove this type of content from these platforms. So are they choosing not to use it? Why wouldn't they want to remove this type of content from their platform?
Look, I think it's because it isn't a primary concern for them. They just don't care enough. And they've been encouraged to not care as well by the laws in the United States. Nikki, you and I have talked about this before, but in 1996, Congress passed a law before any social media companies existed called the Communications Decency Act. And Section 230 of it says that if you own a website and people write comments on that website, you aren't legally responsible for those comments. Right. Now, that kind of makes sense when it comes to a news website, say, where people can comment underneath. And it's not their primary business. But when your business is comments, third-party content, and your algorithms aggressively reorder that content to produce an experience for people by sort of like a mosaic. It's not the individual tiles. It's the picture that the individual tiles, when piled together, make up. They are in the mosaic of content business, not in the content business. And they are never held liable for any harm caused by it. So let me give you an example. If your child is kills themselves because of self-harm content on a platform that was algorithmically amplified to them tens of thousands of times until they thought it was normal that if you hurt inside, you hurt yourself on the outside. There's nothing that you can do to hold that platform accountable. If your child is bullied to death on a platform in which you've told that platform again and again and again that my child is being really badly bullied, these are the people who are responsible, please change the way that your platform works and please do something to intervene in this instance, but they do nothing. There's nothing you can do. And I think that has created that legal immunity, which is probably unjustifiable in the modern world, given how central these platforms are to our experience today. That what it's created is a culture of arrogance and impunity in which they figure, well, if it's not legally my job, why do I care?
Can we expect to see some reform of that law in the next year? I know that the social media companies spend tens of millions of dollars every year lobbying against these bills, so it's been impossible to get anything passed. But I think we're entering a time where parents are aware of the importance of not allowing this immunity shield to exist anymore. So what do you expect to happen in the next, or hope to happen in the next Congress?
Well, look, we had the Kids Online Safety Act in this Congress, which had bipartisan support. It was the single most signatories for any bill in the Senate in this Congress. It didn't get through. We've had people talking about Section 230 reform for some years now. Now, the truth is that it's been blocked in the past, not just by Republicans. I'm not saying this is a partisan issue, but actually quite often by Democrats. But what we are seeing is a change, because I think it's gotten to the point where there are so many people that have been affected by different aspects of how social media companies have arrogantly refused to take responsibility for the harm that their platforms can cause, that there is a desire for change. But while the US is lagging behind, the truth is that other economic blocs and other countries around the world, other major democracies and liberal democracies like the United Kingdom, like the European Union, have taken action. So in the past year and a half, the EU has brought forward the Digital Services Act that will allow them to be held liable if they harm kids. The Online Safety Act in the UK creates, again, that liability. And crucially, Nikki, they also create transparency as well, because one of the problems that we have is that we can't see what's happening on these platforms, and it's vital that we can do so.
Yeah. We're getting access to some of that behind the scenes, some of the behind the scenes reports through all the lawsuits. 40 plus states are suing social media companies. And I think within that discovery, we're starting to see some of what the social media companies know, and it's unacceptable what they allow to happen. The self-harm content thing is especially disturbing to me. I'll share with you that I went to check on my third grader's iPad at her school. We don't use personal devices at home, but I went to YouTube on the school device at the school and scrolled through YouTube for less than 2 minutes and was served a video saying hurting yourself is easy and showing a cut with blood dripping down. So there it is. That could have been the video if my daughter had seen that. YouTube would have continually served her more and more self-harm and pro-suicide content until she thought that was normal. And this is an example of why we need regulation, because I don't allow for access to that platform, but they still will get access on devices that I don't have control over, right?
It is remarkable because, of course, social media, YouTube kids may use for 70 or 80 minutes a day. You've also got the other platforms as well. 14 to 17-year-olds in America, on average, use social media platforms for 4.8 hours a day, 5 hours a day.
Yeah.
And there is this notion that we can fix this by being better parents. I mean,
right.
If I spent an hour a day telling my kid about what can go wrong and what's right and what's wrong and what's true and what's not and how to respect themselves and love themselves, how on earth does that counteract 5 hours of reprogramming by platforms that tell them this is what everyone is saying and doing? Mm-hmm. And it is, of course, it's the frequency, the unrelenting, the mechanical, the mathematical precision, aggression, the lack of compassion that these platforms have at their fundamental levels, the way that their recommendation algorithms work that make them so lethal to young people and are really affecting not just, their mental health, but also affecting what they believe to be true about the world around them. You see the damage being done to young men and the way that they treat women, the way that they think about women, the misogyny, the hatred towards women that's being promulgated on these platforms. All of this combines into a system that is devastating for the next generation.
Okay, so when parents are thinking about this and what to allow their kids access to, they may think, well, what about YouTube Kids? It's got to be safe because it's YouTube Kids. And I know your test was not on YouTube Kids, but what is your opinion on whether the content is safer or safe on that platform?
See, the problem with all of these platforms is that they rely on the person who's posting the content to decide for themselves whether or not it's appropriate for kids. Yeah. And I'm sorry, but that is just not good enough. You need real guardrails. This idea that, that they can't be responsible because there's too much of it. It's like saying, well, look, they've got so many customers. You can't possibly expect Ford to be careful about every car that comes out.
Right.
I mean, if a few blow up, that's just business, baby. Wow. And I think, it is really about healthy business practice. I used to work in business, and I've worked for most of my career in politics now, but and in advocacy. And I used to be very good friends with a famous conservative lord, a guy called Lord Young in the UK, who ironically was very old. And Lord Young used to say to me that when he was in business, he did it because he wanted to be respected in the community. Now, the problem is with some of these social media giants, they're run by people who are so unbelievably wealthy that there is no community to which they feel accountable. They feel that they have no one that they need to respect them because their bank balances give them all the respect they need. And I think that when you've got people who are so disconnected from your and my lives and the lives of Americans all around the country, I live in Washington, D.C., my neighbors' lives that they simply do not understand, could not recognize, don't have any connection to. I worry that these platforms have become monsters that are simply unaccountable to any of the normal prevailing trends, the beliefs, the needs of our societies.
And when it comes to YouTube, it's become so integrated into our kids' daily life and even at school. My own district tech guy told me that YouTube is the #1 educational website and that they can't remove it from the kids' school-issued devices. A year later, my kid gets served a self-harm video on that platform, on that school-issued device. But I'm wondering what your reaction is to YouTube being used at school. Should parents be advocating for that platform to be not allowed?
Look, I want to give the room and the space for administrators and for teachers and people who spend their lives trying to give our kids the education that they deserve to have the ability to make decisions. But I don't think that they are fully informed of the decisions they take. And one of the problems is that these companies are incredibly aggressive at telling people, as I said, that the claims they make are that they don't do all these things that they end up then doing.
Yeah.
And it's the disconnect between the reality and what they claim that is so dangerous. And it's why you need organizations like mine that have access to data, that have access. I have PhD researchers, over a dozen, who are working on this day in, day out. But one of the things is that we need to make sure that information is getting in the hands of school administrators and that they are able to then come back and show us how they've thought about it and how that they've integrated that into their decision making. So please send your school administrator the report and ask them, what do you have to say about this?
Right. Okay. And, parents can restrict at home. We can advocate within our schools, but it's not our responsibility to make the platform safe. So what are your recommendations for YouTube? What can they do to fix this?
Look, I think YouTube could, if they wanted to, actually enforce their rules, really invest into it. This is one of the world's wealthiest companies, more so than any other private organization in the world. They have the financial capacity and the engineers and the brilliance to be able to solve this problem, but they've chosen not to. And I think at this point, relying on companies to do the right thing is probably actually abandoning our children to hopelessness. So we need our lawmakers who represent our collective will as a society to step in. They've shown that they understand this is an issue. That's why this bill had over 70 senators to the Kids Online Safety Act signing it, saying, yes, we know this is necessary. But damn it, they need to get off their butts and legislate. It has been so depressing watching, debates over the most ridiculous things in the last few years in Congress, when they should have been aggressively moving to make sure that our kids are safe, and they're simply not doing so. It's time for reform of Section 230. Section 230 is taking the lives and the minds of our children.
Okay. And this report is about YouTube. Your previous report was about TikTok, but this is not just a YouTube or a TikTok problem. One thing I find interesting is I post the same videos to Instagram and YouTube for my content. And Instagram never takes anything down. YouTube actually restricts and removes videos way more often. So we're talking about a failure on YouTube on things that Instagram and Meta are not removing at all. Same exact content. So what do you have to say to parents about how widespread this problem is, right? It's an all social media problem, not a platform specific problem.
It's a Silicon Valley problem of every single one of these companies operates to the same rules, the same laws, and therefore the same logic and the same economic logic. This is about them trying to spend as little money as possible on keeping their platform safe while making as much money as possible from the attention that the videos generate. And until you rebalance that, until you put responsibilities on these companies, they're not going to do anything. Look, if people can get away with it, they will, especially people that have no connection to, most other citizens' day-to-day lives. And so what we really need is for mechanisms for them to have to think about these things. It is crazy that a deli in Brooklyn or a deli in Cleveland, Ohio, has more laws governing their transparency, no-knock inspections, health and safety, the Food and Drug Administration, like a whole array of agencies there to make sure that what they serve to people isn't going to kill them, than a social media company that uses our kids' minds for 5 hours a day to make profit. And that's what they do.
Yeah. Okay. So for parents, you need to advocate for kids' online safety. So you can reach out to your senator and your representative in the House here in the US. And it doesn't take a lot of time. It's very easy. When you make that phone call, it goes to voicemail. You don't even have to talk to anybody, but we have to speak up so that we get these laws passed to protect our kids. And on the home level, here at home, you recently had a new baby. If there's no laws passed by the time she is of age to use social media, would you allow her to use it?
Well, my wife and I talk about this all the time, and we talk about that we want to make sure that when our child is at the age where she's bugging us about having a cell phone or whatever it's going to be, then, an integrated ocular implant that gives them access to the internet.
Nope, not.
Those devices are tested and safe, and that they're subject to normal safety legislation. They should be subject to negligence law the same as any other company. And so we are trying to make sure that we do that. But look, that's why we set up a website called protectingkidsonline.org. It has a parent's guide that's free of charge, that's written by me and also by a father of a young girl, Molly Russell, who took her own life because of this kind of content. And her father, Ian, is on the board of my organization. He's someone I wish I'd never had to meet, because the reason why he came to the organization is so tragic, to lose your baby girl. But at the same time, the advice that we give in there about how to have healthy conversations, how to create a constant dialogue that's shame-free between kids and adults, in which we're exchanging information. Because, Nikki, you know as well as I do that quite often we have no idea what our kids are looking at. So we need them to be open and honest with us about what they're seeing, so we can be helpful to them and contextualize it and tell them, this is an algorithm that's telling you this all the time, but look, it's not true. And these are dangerous, or these are wrong, or there are other ways to achieve the goals that you want. And there's other ways to measure your self-worth than whether or not you are on a 200 calorie a day diet, which is what some of these videos recommend, and you have a skeletal body.
So sad. Okay. And with the lack of social media platforms being transparent and telling us what's actually happening, I am so grateful. We are so grateful for CCDH and doing the work and exposing what's really happening on these platforms. And so you're really saving lives by the work that you do. I will link to the new report and the Deadly by Design report and your protectingkidsonline.org site in the episode notes. And Imran, thank you just so much for spending the time and effort to warn parents and guide us through this dangerous world.
Thank you, Nikki. I mean, and to all the parents out there, look, we can do this together. There are more of us than there are of those social media company oligarchs, the people who own these companies. And ultimately, our democratic voices should be heard. Because in the end, this is our society, and we get to shape it to be the best that we can be for the next generation. That's our most profound, fundamental, and sacred of duties.
And we have to use our voices to do that, right?
Yes, sir.
Got to do it.